The silence was suffocating. It wasn't the kind of silence where you can relax and enjoy the peace. No, this one felt like a storm was about to break. I was sitting in the back corner of the living room, watching the clock on the wall. The ticking seemed louder tonight. Each second, each minute, each hour that passed only magnified the weight pressing on my chest. I knew the evening would unfold like this. The little signals had been building for months, subtle things that no one else seemed to notice. But I did. I noticed everything. It wasn't something obvious like a big fight or a huge argument. No, that would have been easier to handle. It was in the small moments. It was in the way she looked at me, or rather, the way she didn't look at me anymore. The way she turned away from me when I entered a room. The way she used to share her day with me, but now, when I asked, she'd just give me short answers or nod and smile. That night was supposed to be normal, nothing out of the ordinary. Just another Friday evening at home. Claire had gone out for a girls' night with her friends, something she did more often than I'd like to admit. But tonight felt different. I could feel the weight of the evening long before the front door opened, long before she returned. I wasn't even sure why I decided to wait up for her. Maybe it was that nagging feeling that had been growing inside me, the feeling that tonight, things would finally come to a head. I didn't want to be in the dark anymore. I didn't want to keep pretending I didn't notice the cracks that were forming in our lives. I was in the living room, lights dimmed low, my phone in my hand, but barely paying attention to whatever was on the screen. My eyes kept darting to the door, expecting her to come through it at any moment. The anticipation was like a quiet drumbeat in my chest. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for. Maybe some kind of clarity. Maybe some sign that everything was still okay. But what I didn't expect was the moment she walked through that door. She wasn't alone. I didn't hear him at first, but I heard their voices. The laughter. It wasn't loud or rowdy, but it was intimate. The kind of laughter you share with someone when you're comfortable, when you're close. It wasn't the kind of laughter Claire shared with me anymore. I heard him say something that made her laugh, and when I turned to look at the doorway, I saw them standing there. She was standing just a little too close to him. Her hand rested on his arm in a way that made my stomach churn. I couldn't see his face yet, but I didn't need to. I didn't need to know who he was to understand what was happening. For a moment, I froze. My heart pounded in my chest, and my mind raced with 1,000 questions. Why hadn't she told me? Why had she felt the need to hide this from me? She must have known I'd be here. She must have known I'd be watching. But I stayed still. I stayed silent. I didn't want to make a scene. Not yet. Not until I had the answers. Claire noticed me standing in the dim light of the living room. Her eyes widened slightly, her smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. For a moment, it looked like she was going to turn and walk away. But then she stopped herself, adjusting her posture and smoothing down her dress as if nothing were wrong. "Hey," she said, her voice casual, but there was an edge to it now. "You're still up?" I could barely form words. All I could do was nod, my gaze flickering to the man standing beside her. The man who, from the look of it, had been in my wife's life in a way I hadn't known. Claire followed my gaze, and I could see her jaw tighten. She cleared her throat, giving me a nervous smile. "This is Rob," she said, her voice trailing off, as if unsure of how to finish the introduction. Rob. The name didn't mean anything to me, but I could see his hand resting too comfortably at her waist, the way their shoulders were so casually close. It was all too familiar, too intimate. "Nice to meet you," Rob said, extending a hand toward me. He had a calm confidence in his demeanor that I could never pull off. The kind of man who didn't seem to notice the tension hanging thick in the air. I could almost feel Claire's discomfort now, but it wasn't enough to make her back off. I took his hand, more out of obligation than anything. I didn't want to be rude, but I could feel it, the weight of what was happening. I didn't know if Claire thought I wouldn't notice, or if she thought I wouldn't care. But either way, I had seen enough. The moment she introduced him to me, everything changed. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd ever felt in my life. I could see her fidgeting with her keys, eyes darting nervously between me and Rob, and it was clear to me now that something had shifted. Something was no longer the way it should be. Rob cleared his throat awkwardly, sensing the tension. "Well, we should probably get going," he said, not waiting for Claire's response. But before he could move, I spoke. My voice was colder than I had expected. "No, I think you should stay for a while." Claire's eyes shot to me, wide with alarm. She opened her mouth to speak, but I was already walking toward the kitchen. The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. It wasn't a question anymore. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This wasn't a small mistake. Whatever this was, whatever they were, it wasn't something I could ignore anymore. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. Not anymore. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel every ounce of it pressing down on my chest. I hadn't planned on this. I hadn't expected to be standing here, in the kitchen, watching Claire and Rob exchange uneasy glances. It wasn't supposed to go this way, but here we were. Claire took a step toward me, her eyes darting between Rob and me. "Michael, this really isn't what you think," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I can explain." I couldn't look at her, not just yet. I was still processing everything. The laughter, the proximity, the way Rob had looked at her. My mind raced with 1,000 questions. Why hadn't she told me about him? Was this something recent? Was I completely blind to what had been happening under my nose? Rob shifted awkwardly, as if he could sense the storm brewing. He cleared his throat and put his hands in his pockets, his posture a strange mix of confidence and unease. "Look, man, I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I just came by to grab something from Claire. We were talking about some work stuff." I almost laughed. Work stuff? Really? I wasn't buying it for a second. I could see right through that excuse, and I wasn't sure if he thought I was dumb or if he was just trying to play it off like it was nothing. Claire had never been that casual with someone, at least not in front of me. But Claire was still trying to salvage the situation, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "Michael, please just let me explain. Rob and I have been talking, yes, but it's nothing like what you're thinking. It's just complicated. You know how things have been between us lately." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. There it was again, the familiar excuse. Things have been complicated. That phrase had become the catch-all for every awkward moment, every unspoken truth, every uncomfortable silence that had plagued our marriage for the past year. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth from her, but instead, I just stood there, my fists clenched at my sides. I turned to Rob, narrowing my eyes. "So, how long has this been going on?" "The work stuff," I added, the words dripping with sarcasm. Rob opened his mouth to respond, but Claire cut him off, her voice suddenly sharp. "It's not what you think, Michael," she snapped. "I swear, there's nothing going on between us." For a brief moment, I almost believed her. But then I remembered everything. The late nights, the phone call she had taken in another room, the way she'd started leaving the house more often. My mind flashed back to those little things I had brushed off at the time, telling myself it was nothing. But now it all clicked. It wasn't nothing. It was everything. And I had been too blind to see it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Claire stood there, waiting for me to say something, but I couldn't find the words. What was there to say? How could I look at her the same way again? How could I trust her? And then, without thinking, I found myself saying something I hadn't even realized I was feeling. "You've been lying to me, Claire. For how long?" Her face went pale. "Michael, no. I haven't been lying." But I wasn't convinced. "Don't lie to me. You think I didn't notice? All the little things, the distance between us, the way you stopped coming home on time, the way you were so different? I've been watching. And now, I'm seeing the truth." Her eyes filled with tears, but there was no apology in her gaze, only fear. Fear of being caught. Fear of what I might do. Rob shifted uncomfortably, but I didn't care about him. Not anymore. It was Claire I needed to focus on. It was her I needed answers from. I stepped toward her, my voice cold. "Tell me, Claire. Tell me everything. What's been going on between you two? And don't you dare tell me it's nothing." She took a shaky breath, her lips quivering as if she were searching for the right words. "I never meant for this to happen, Michael. It's just, I've been so unhappy. And Rob, he was there? He listened to me when you didn't. He made me feel seen again." The words hit me like a slap to the face. My mind spun. She hadn't been happy? She hadn't told me she was unhappy? And Rob had been the one to see her? The anger and hurt welled up inside me, threatening to spill over. But I held it back. I had to keep it together. I turned to Rob, my voice barely a whisper, but full of venom. "And you? You knew she was married. You knew about me. You still, what? You just went along with it?" Rob shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding mine. I didn't want to cause any trouble. I didn't know how to. Claire interrupted, her voice now more pleading than ever. "Michael, please understand. It was a mistake. A huge mistake. But it wasn't what you think. I didn't want to hurt you. I shook my head, the weight of it all crashing down on me. You didn't want to hurt me? You've been lying to me, sneaking around, and you didn't want to hurt me? The room felt like it was closing in. I wanted to scream, to demand that they leave, to end this charade. But instead, I did the one thing I hadn't expected to do. I turned and walked away. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do, but I knew one thing. Everything had changed. I stepped into the hallway, the weight of Claire's words still hanging heavy in the air. My head was spinning, my thoughts racing in every direction. I needed to process what had just happened, but my mind couldn't keep up with the flood of emotions. I felt a mix of betrayal, anger, confusion, and yet, somehow, a strange kind of numbness too. I heard Claire's voice behind me, but I didn't turn around. Michael, please, don't walk away. But I couldn't stay, not with her right there, standing in the doorway like nothing had changed. She thought a few words of apology would fix everything. But this wasn't something that could be fixed with a simple apology. Don't touch me, I muttered, feeling the sting of those words even as they left my mouth. Her footsteps faltered. I never meant for you to find out like this. But I couldn't listen to her anymore. My chest felt tight, and I needed to get out, to think, to breathe. I walked past her, heading for the front door. I heard Rob's voice behind me, but it was drowned out by the pounding in my head. The last thing I needed right now was some guy who wasn't even supposed to be here trying to explain himself. I reached the door and grabbed my coat. But just as I was about to step outside, I heard Claire's voice again, this time much softer, almost a whisper. Michael, I'm sorry. I didn't look back. The words felt hollow, empty. It was too late for apologies. The damage had already been done. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there. Not in that house, not in that life. I needed space. I needed to clear my head. The night air hit me like a cold slap to the face as I stepped out onto the front porch. The streets were quiet, almost eerily so, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a decision. I kept walking, my mind a chaotic storm of thoughts, images, and feelings. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the fact that it felt like I had been the last one to know. The last one to see what had been happening right in front of me. I thought about all the things Claire had said, all the little lies she'd told me over the past few months. And then, I thought about Rob. What did he know? How long had he been a part of this? It wasn't long before I found myself outside the small bar at the corner of our street. I wasn't really in the mood for company, but I needed to get away from the house, from Claire, from everything. I walked in and ordered a drink, taking a seat at the bar. The noise of the crowd and the clinking of glasses felt like a distant hum in my ears. I tried to focus on the glass in front of me, but all I could think about was what had happened back home. A few minutes passed before I felt someone sit next to me. I didn't look up at first, but I could feel their presence, the heat of their body so close to mine. Long night, the voice asked. I didn't need to look to know who it was. It was the bartender, a guy named Matt who had been working at the bar for as long as I could remember. He had an easygoing vibe, always ready with a joke or a kind word. But tonight, I didn't want his kindness. I didn't want anyone's pity. Yeah, I said quietly, my voice a bit rougher than I intended. You could say that. He paused, as if considering something. You want to talk about it? I didn't, but something about his genuine tone made me think maybe it wouldn't hurt. Maybe I needed someone to listen, even if just for a moment. I found out some things tonight, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Things about my wife, about everything. Matt didn't push. He just gave me a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that he was there, if I needed him. For a while, I didn't say anything else. I just drank my whiskey, the burn in my throat matching the one in my chest. But slowly, the words started to spill out. About Claire, about Rob, about the hollow feeling I couldn't shake. It felt good, in a way, to finally say it out loud. To speak the words that had been choking me. But with each word, the reality of what had happened sunk deeper into my bones. I'd been living a lie. And worse, Claire had let me. When I finally left the bar, the night seemed darker, colder. I had a sense of clarity, but it was the kind that made everything feel worse instead of better. I knew that I had to go back to the house. I had to confront Claire, but I wasn't sure I was ready. I stood outside the house for a long moment, staring at the front door. Every part of me wanted to turn away, to walk down the street and never look back. But I knew I couldn't do that. Not yet. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. I stepped inside the house, and the familiar scent of our home hit me, but it felt foreign now. Every piece of furniture, every picture on the wall, seemed to mock me. The house that had once been filled with laughter now felt empty, as if the warmth had been drained from every corner. Claire was sitting on the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes flickered up when I walked in, but she didn't move. The space between us felt so vast, like there was an ocean separating us. I stood there for a long moment, unsure of what to say. The words I wanted to say were too heavy, too full of accusation, but I couldn't stop them from forming in my mind. She took a deep breath and spoke first, her voice tentative. "Michael, I didn't want this. I swear." I looked at her, the woman I had shared my life with, the woman I thought I knew. "Then why? Why didn't you just tell me?" Her eyes welled up with tears, but she quickly wiped them away, shaking her head. "I didn't know how to. Things just happened. I never meant for it to get this far." I wanted to believe her. Part of me wanted to take her in my arms, pretend everything was fine, and go back to how it was before. But I couldn't. Not anymore. Not after everything. "You never meant for it to get this far?" I repeated, my voice low. "How long, Claire? How long have you been lying to me?" She hesitated, her hands trembling. I didn't know how to fix things between us. We were drifting apart. I was lonely. And then Rob started listening. He made me feel seen again. The words stung, but I forced myself to listen. "So you thought it was okay to just run to him? To let this happen?" She opened her mouth to speak, but stopped, her gaze falling to the floor. "I never wanted to hurt you, Michael. I swear I didn't." I could see the guilt in her eyes, but it wasn't enough. The damage had been done. I had been left in the dark for far too long, and now everything felt like a lie. The trust, the bond we'd built over years, it was all shattered. "I don't know if I can believe you anymore, Claire," I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "I don't know if I can even look at you the same way." She stood up suddenly, desperation flooding her face. "Please, Michael, don't say that. I love you. I didn't want to hurt you." I shook my head, stepping back, creating distance between us. "You've already hurt me, Claire. More than you know." The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. My whole world felt like it was crumbling, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. Claire reached out as if to touch me, but I flinched away, almost involuntarily. I didn't want her touch. Not now. Not after everything. "I don't know what you want me to say, Michael," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to betray you." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to process what she was saying, trying to hold on to something. Anything that could explain why this was happening. But all I saw was the woman who had chosen someone else over me, who had let a stranger into our lives while I was none the wiser. "I think it's too late for apologies," I said finally, my voice cold. "You've made your choice, Claire. And so have I." She looked at me, the tears finally spilling over. But I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt empty, like something had been torn out of me and left a hollow space in its place. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she whispered again. I didn't answer her. Instead, I turned and walked away, heading toward the door. I couldn't stay in that house a second longer. I needed air. I needed to get away. As I walked out, I heard her call my name one last time, but I didn't turn back. The door closed behind me with a finality that echoed in my chest. It was over. I didn't know where I was going, but the air outside was cold, sharp, and it felt like it was cutting through me, waking me up. I couldn't stand the idea of being cooped up in that house, surrounded by memories of a life that felt like a lie. The streets were quieter than usual, the city's hum softened by the early hour. But my mind was still racing, turning over the conversation with Claire, over and over again. How had we gotten here? How had I not seen it sooner? The realization stung harder than anything she could have said. She was right about one thing. Things had been drifting between us for a long time. But I had always told myself that it was just the stress, just the routine of life catching up to us. I never thought it would be something like this. As I walked, I let my thoughts run wild. Rob, what had he been to her? It didn't matter that he wasn't here now. I couldn't erase the image of him standing so close to her. That touch, that look. Was he the person she'd turn to when I couldn't be what she needed? My phone buzzed in my pocket, interrupting my thoughts. I took it out, seeing Claire's name flash across the screen. I stared at it for a moment, my thumb hovering over the screen, unsure of what to do. What could she possibly have to say now? I didn't answer. The decision felt heavy. It had only been a few hours, but already I knew that something inside me had broken. I had to think about what I wanted. Not what she wanted. Not what was easy. What I wanted. And in that moment, I realized I wanted out. I didn't want to be stuck in this cycle of doubt and hurt. I didn't want to be tied to someone who had chosen someone else in the shadows, someone who had lied to my face. I needed space. I needed to breathe. I ended up at the park. It was dark now, the streetlights casting long shadows across the paths. I found a bench near the pond and sat down, letting the stillness wash over me. There was a quiet that felt almost comforting, like the world had slowed down just for me. But even here, I couldn't escape the weight on my shoulders. I had to make a choice. The life I'd known, the marriage I'd built, it was slipping away. I had to decide what I would do with it. And as I sat there, alone with my thoughts, I realized something else. I couldn't stay in the same place, emotionally or physically. I needed change. But that didn't mean I knew exactly what to do next. I pulled out my phone again, this time scrolling through the contacts list, my finger hovering over the number of an old friend. James. We hadn't talked in a while. He was the kind of guy who knew how to talk through things, not judge, just listen. I needed someone to talk to, someone who could help me sort through the mess in my head. But when I thought about it, I realized I wasn't sure if I was ready to talk to anyone just yet. I put my phone away and leaned back on the bench, staring at the stars. I couldn't believe how much had changed in such a short time. Claire's betrayal was one thing, but I was also confronting the fact that I didn't know who I was anymore. Was I the man who had built a life around his marriage, his family? Or was I the fool who had been blind to the cracks all along? The answer wasn't clear. I didn't have any answers, not right now. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe that was okay. I didn't need to have it all figured out. Not yet. But I did need to make a choice. And that choice was going to start with one thing: leaving. The night passed slowly, every tick of the clock echoing in the quiet apartment where I had found refuge. I couldn't shake the weight of what had happened. The conversation with Claire, her tear-filled eyes, her desperate pleas, it all felt surreal. It was like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. And yet, I was wide awake, feeling the full impact of her betrayal. I tried to sleep, but the thought of going back to that house, to face her again, kept me from resting. The weight of it all felt crushing, and I couldn't bear the thought of going back to that life just yet. The decision had already been made. I would leave. But where would I go from here? What would I do with all this anger, confusion, and pain? It was early morning when I finally decided I couldn't stay in the apartment anymore. I needed to clear my head. I didn't want to sit alone, waiting for Claire's inevitable texts or calls, trying to explain herself again. I needed air. I needed distance. So, I grabbed my jacket and left the apartment, heading for the one place I hadn't visited in years, my father's house. It felt like a strange move, considering the last time we had really talked was during a particularly ugly family argument. But in that moment, I needed somewhere familiar, somewhere safe. I needed to remember what it was like before everything got complicated. I drove across town, the streets still dark and empty. My mind was in a haze, bouncing between thoughts of Claire, thoughts of Rob, and most of all, thoughts of what the hell I was supposed to do now. My life was a mess, and I didn't even know how to start picking up the pieces. When I reached my father's house, the porch light was on, casting a soft glow in the early morning. I rang the doorbell, not really expecting him to answer. But to my surprise, the door swung open almost immediately. Mike, my dad's voice was rough with sleep, but he didn't hesitate to pull me into a hug. What's going on? You okay? I didn't answer right away. I just stood there in his arms, the weight of the last few days crashing down on me. The one person who had never let me down, who had never betrayed me, was standing right in front of me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I had someone I could turn to. I need to talk, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I hated how weak I sounded, but I couldn't stop it. He didn't say anything at first, just nodded and stepped aside, allowing me to enter. The house smelled like his old leather chair and fresh coffee. The familiar comfort of it almost made me feel like a kid again, back when the world seemed simple. We sat down at the kitchen table, and I poured myself a cup of coffee, my hands shaking just slightly as I tried to steady myself. Tell me what's going on, son, he said, his voice calm but insistent. I took a deep breath. It's Claire. She's been seeing someone else. Rob, I found out last night. She's been lying to me for months, and I don't even know who I am anymore. The words were out, and as I said them aloud, they hit me harder than I thought they would. It wasn't just that Claire had been unfaithful, it was that I had been blind to it. I had let it go on for so long without noticing, without doing anything. My father didn't say anything right away, just sat there, his hands wrapped around his own cup of coffee, his gaze steady on me. After a long pause, he spoke. I'm sorry you're going through this, Mike. But let me tell you something. You're not the first to go through it, and you won't be the last. I stared at him, confused. What do you mean? Everyone thinks they have it figured out. We all think we know what our life will look like, who we'll be with. But sometimes, life throws a curveball. Sometimes, people aren't who we think they are. But you have to make a decision about how you're going to handle it. Whether you're going to let it destroy you, or whether you're going to rise above it. His words hit me in a way I didn't expect. He was right. I could let this wreck me, or I could fight for myself. But what did that mean? What did it even look like to rise above this? I had no answers, only questions. I don't know what to do, Dad, I admitted, the words spilling out before I could stop them. I don't even know where to go from here. He nodded, his eyes softening with understanding. You're going to have to take it one step at a time. Don't rush yourself. But you need to make sure that whatever you decide, it's for you. Not for her. Not for anyone else. This is your life now. You're the one who has to live with it. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I held it back. My father had always been a man of few words, but when he spoke, it was as though the world made sense for just a moment. Take some time, Mike. Figure out who you are in all of this. And don't let anyone make you feel like you're not enough. The words hung in the air as I sat there, unsure of what I was supposed to do next. But somehow, just being there with my dad, feeling like I wasn't alone, gave me a little bit of strength. I stayed there for a while longer, not really talking, just thinking. When I finally left, I felt a bit lighter, as though a small weight had been lifted. But I knew the hardest part was still ahead of me. I still had to face Claire. I still had to face the truth of everything. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a chance. The day felt like it was stretching on forever. Even as I walked out of my father's house, a strange calm had settled over me. I had no idea what I was going to do next, but I was sure of one thing. I wasn't going to let this define me. Not anymore. I didn't want to go back home. I didn't want to walk into that house and pretend like everything was fine. But I couldn't avoid it forever. Claire was there, waiting, and I knew it was time to face the music. When I pulled up to the house, I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the front door. My mind was still swirling. I didn't want to have this conversation, but deep down, I knew it had to happen. There was no avoiding it. I stepped out of the car and walked to the front door, each step feeling heavier than the last. The moment I knocked, I could feel the weight of everything hanging in the air. I didn't want to open the door to more excuses, more apologies that wouldn't mean anything. But I couldn't avoid it forever. When Claire opened the door, I saw the same familiar face. The same woman I had married. But there was something different in her eyes. Guilt. Fear. But still, a part of her that seemed distant, unreachable. Michael, she said softly, her voice shaky. You came. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at her, trying to make sense of everything. The woman standing in front of me was someone I didn't know anymore. She had betrayed me in ways that were still hard to fully grasp. I don't know what to say, Claire, I finally said, my voice tight with frustration. You've broken my trust in ways I can't even explain. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She looked at me with a quiet desperation. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know how to fix things. I was lost. Lost, I repeated bitterly. Is that really the excuse you're going to use? She looked down, her hands trembling. No, I'm not making excuses. I'm just trying to tell you the truth. The truth you deserve to hear. I stepped back, shaking my head. The truth? What truth? That you've been lying to me for months? That you've been seeing someone else behind my back? Claire flinched at the words, but she didn't try to deny them. Instead, she nodded slowly. Yes, I've been seeing Rob. I never meant for it to happen, Michael. I swear I didn't. But it did. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Her apology felt hollow. I had heard it too many times already. I didn't know what else she could say to make it better. There was no magic phrase, no perfect sentence that could undo the damage. The trust between us was gone. And in its place, there was only a deep emptiness. I don't know what you want from me anymore, Claire. I said, my voice breaking. You made your choice. And now I have to make mine. She looked at me with pleading eyes, but I couldn't meet her gaze. I couldn't look at the woman who had torn our lives apart. Not anymore. I don't want to lose you, she whispered, taking a step closer. Please, Michael. We can fix this. We can work through it. But I couldn't move. I couldn't bring myself to take that step forward, to let her touch me again. No, I said, my voice steady now, more sure than I'd felt in a long time. I don't think we can fix this. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel the weight of the decision I had just made hanging in the air between us. But it wasn't just her betrayal that had led me to this point. It was the realization that we had both changed, that we were no longer the people we used to be. There was no going back. I'm leaving, I said finally, my voice cold, distant. I need space. I need to find out who I am without this. Without you. Her face crumpled at the words, but I couldn't let myself soften. Not now. I hope you find what you're looking for, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I love you. I always have. Those words didn't reach me anymore. They felt like a distant echo, something that no longer mattered. I turned and walked away, my heart heavy but resolute. As I stepped back into the night, I felt a small, fleeting sense of relief. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. What came next would determine who I would become. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to face that unknown. The days after I left felt like a blur. The first few days were heavy. There was the pain, the anger, the overwhelming feeling of loss. I still couldn't believe what had happened, but with each passing day, it became easier to breathe. I stayed at a friend's place for a while, trying to get my bearings. I spent time doing things I hadn't done in years, like reading books I had put down long ago, going for long walks in the park, and reconnecting with people I had lost touch with. But it wasn't just the distractions that helped. It was the quiet moments of reflection. I spent a lot of time thinking about what I wanted from life, from myself. I realized that in the years with Claire, I had lost sight of who I was. I had been so focused on trying to make everything perfect, on holding on to what we once had, that I hadn't stopped to think about whether I was still the person I wanted to be. It was then that I realized I had to stop looking backward. I couldn't keep trying to fix a relationship that had been broken for a long time. But I also didn't have to give up on the idea of love or happiness. It wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. One afternoon, about a month later, I decided to visit Claire. It wasn't about reconciliation, not in the way I might have thought it would be. It was about closure. I needed to see her one last time, to talk, to truly let go. When I arrived at her apartment, she was surprised to see me. Her face was still pale from everything that had happened, but there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. I didn't think you'd come, she said quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. I had to, I replied, my voice steady. Not for us, but for me. We sat down on her couch, the silence between us comfortable this time, not full of anger or resentment. We talked about the past, about what went wrong, but more than that, we talked about what we had learned. And we both realized that sometimes, letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means creating space for something new to grow. I don't hate you, Claire, I said after a while, the words feeling like a weight lifting off my chest. But I can't be with you anymore. Not in the way I was. She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes, but she didn't try to stop them this time. I understand. I wish things had been different. I really do. And for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't an easy decision. It wasn't one I'd wanted to make. But it was the right one. We both needed to heal. We both needed to grow, separately, in order to find the people we were meant to become. Walking out of her apartment for the last time, I felt lighter. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew that I was finally on the path to finding myself again. The road ahead was uncertain, but it wasn't as daunting as it once seemed. I wasn't afraid anymore. A few months later, I found myself in a new city. I'd started a new job, made new friends, and most importantly, I had started taking care of myself. The past still lingered in the back of my mind, but it no longer controlled me. I had learned the most important lesson of all, that I was worthy of happiness, no matter what had happened before. And as the sun set one evening, I realized something that made me smile to myself. I was okay. Not perfect, not yet whole, but on my way. And that was enough. The future, finally, felt like a place full of possibility.